10,000 BC. The world is at a silent turning point. Vast ice sheets are finally retreating, and the climate of the Fertile Crescent is warming. Humans have stopped their aimless nomadic wandering and started a revolutionary experiment, the dawn of agriculture. They gathered wild grasses, built the first permanent structures, and began storing grain in massive, deep pits. They truly believed they were building a stable future, but they were actually ringing a dinner bell for a hidden army. An explosion of rodents followed, mice and rats that would soon descend upon their settlements, threatening to devour the very foundation of their new way of life. And then, the predators emerged from the deep shadows. These were the African wildcats, solitary, fierce, and independent creatures who had spent millions of years hunting in the wild forests and grasslands. They did not come for the humans. They did not come for warmth, protection, or the promise of human love. They came because humans had accidentally created the greatest rodent buffet in the history of the planet. While humans were busy with their crops and primitive pottery, these cats made a calculated, primal decision to stay close. They were not tamed. They were pure opportunists, masters of the ambush. A silent partnership was born in the darkness of the night, a secret, unspoken agreement where humans provided the hunting grounds and the cats provided the survival of our food supply. It was a cold, pragmatic beginning to a journey that would span 12,000 years, leading them from the dust of the ancient granaries right into the center of your modern living room. As the centuries marched steadily forward, the bond shifted from mere coincidence to a vital, functional necessity. Life in a Neolithic village was incredibly precarious. A single bad harvest or a sudden, explosive plague of rats could spell absolute disaster for an entire community. The grain stores were the lifeblood of human survival, but they were under constant, brutal siege by endless hordes of rodents. These creatures multiplied faster than the humans could ever hope to contain them. The wild cats, having successfully established their territory on the absolute fringes of these human settlements, became the silent, watchful guardians of the harvest. They didn't need to be fed, they didn't need to be trained, and they certainly didn't ask for any permission. They simply did what they were born to do, hunt with lethal precision. And with every single rodent they removed, they inadvertently secured the future of human development. They were, in essence, the first outsourced service for municipal pest control. These early farmers, though lacking in modern science, were incredibly keen observers of cause and effect. They saw the undeniable correlation between the presence of these small, elusive predators and the survival of their precious, life-sustaining grain. This wasn't friendship, not yet. It was something far more profound. A partnership based on cold, hard, mutual utility. It was a silent agreement between two very different species, each pursuing their own survival. This was the true foundation, the invisible architecture upon which the future of civilization would eventually be built. The partnership that began in the granaries eventually blossomed into something far more sacred. In the fertile lands of ancient Egypt, around 2500 BC, the practical role of the cat shifted. They were no longer just pest controllers. They were elevated to the status of living divinity. Egyptians watched their feline companions with fascination. They observed how these animals moved between the worlds of day and night, how they saw through the absolute darkness when humans were blind, and how they could be both gentle mothers and merciless killers of venomous snakes. To a civilization obsessed with balance and the divine order of the universe, the cat became the perfect vessel for the sacred. The goddess Bastet, originally represented as a fierce lioness, evolved in the collective imagination of the people. She softened into the domestic cat, a guardian of the home, a protector of fertility, and a shield against the unseen dangers of the afterlife. This was a cultural revolution. The cat was no longer a guest. The cat became a member of the royal family of the gods. The scale of this devotion was staggering. Entire cities like Bubastis became temple complexes dedicated to their honor, where thousands of cats were cared for by priests, adorned with gold and jewelry, and fed the finest delicacies. When these sacred animals passed, they were mummified with the same intricate rituals reserved for pharaohs. Millions of cat mummies were laid to rest, a testament to a bond that had transcended utility and entered the realm of the infinite. It was the moment humanity finally looked into a cat's eyes and saw not an animal, but a miracle. While Egypt guarded their sacred cats behind temple walls, the rest of the world was oblivious to the feline secret. But secrets don't stay hidden when profit is involved. Phoenician traders, the masters of the Mediterranean, quickly realized that their grain ships were being hollowed out by rats. A ship could be lost and its cargo destroyed in a single 3-week voyage. They needed a solution that was efficient, tireless, and, most importantly, cheap. They found that solution in the cats of Egypt. Despite strict laws forbidding the export of these divine animals, smuggling became a thriving industry. Phoenicians and later the Greeks and Romans began taking cats aboard their vessels. They didn't view them as pets. They were essential maritime logistics. These cats became the first global colonizers. As ships docked in ports from Carthage to Marseille, from Sicily to the far reaches of the Levant, the cats simply stepped off. Imagine the scene: a wooden ship arriving at a bustling harbor after months at sea. A sleek cat slips past the guards into the dark alleys of a foreign city and vanishes. Over centuries, this process repeated itself thousands of times. Cats adapted to every climate, every culture, and every ecosystem they touched. They were the ultimate stowaways, riding the currents of human ambition across the globe. From being the exclusive pride of the Nile to becoming the common, ubiquitous hunter of the Mediterranean world, the cat had successfully initiated the greatest, most unintentional migration in animal history. As the centuries marched onward, the status of the cat began to suffer a brutal transformation. In the heart of medieval Europe, the world turned into a place of rigid religious dogma and deep-seated paranoia. The early church, struggling to impose order on a chaotic continent, viewed anything untamed, anything that lived in the shadows or moved silently in the night, as a potential threat to the soul. Cats, with their glowing, reflective eyes, their nocturnal habits, and their stubborn refusal to be obedient, became the perfect target for a growing culture of fear. By the 13th century, fear became official. Papal bulls suggested that Satan himself could take the form of a black cat, and the kiss of such a creature was whispered to be a sign of a dark pact. This wasn't just superstition. It was a death sentence. As the hysteria of the witch trials swept across towns and villages, the cat was dragged into the darkness. Women accused of witchcraft were questioned about their feline companions, and any cat seen near an accused person was condemned as a demonic familiar. The cruelty that followed was staggering. Cats were thrown from towers, burned in public spectacles, and treated as agents of the devil. Yet, in this grim epic, a tragic irony unfolded. Europe was periodically ravaged by the Black Death, a plague spread by fleas on rats. By systematically destroying their best defense against the rodent population, medieval society inadvertently invited catastrophe into their own homes. While the Islamic world continued to protect and cherish their cats, Europe paid a heavy, silent price for its ignorance. It was a dark, hollow century where the cat, once a guardian of the grain, became a victim of the very creatures it had saved from starvation. By the 19th century, the shadows of the witch trials had finally receded, replaced by the humming machinery of the Industrial Revolution. Victorian society was a world defined by its obsession with order, classification, and the romanticization of the home. It was in this era of soot, steam, and rising middle-class aspiration that the cat finally found its path to redemption. The transformation began with a single, improbable event: the 1871 Crystal Palace Cat Show in London. For the first time in history, cats were not being evaluated by their utility in a barn or their ability to hunt rats in a warehouse. They were being judged on the arch of their tails, the luster of their fur, and the elegance of their gaze. Harrison Weir, the visionary organizer of this pageant, did something revolutionary. He elevated the cat to an object of aesthetic contemplation. Breeders began to define standards, categorizing cats into distinct breeds like the Persians and the British Shorthairs. The barn cat was effectively being rebranded as the household companion. Simultaneously, industrialization forced people into tighter, more organized living spaces in terrace houses and apartment blocks. The cat, with its quiet dignity and independent spirit, proved perfectly suited for the domestic sanctuary. They became status symbols in the parlors of the respectable, cherished by writers like Charles Dickens and monarchs like Queen Victoria herself. The cruelty of previous centuries began to soften under the rise of the early animal protection movement. Charities and rescue societies started to advocate for the humble cat, moving away from the grim practices of the past. It was a golden age of transition. The cat had finally stepped out of the dark alleys and into the warmth of the hearth. No longer just a survival tool, the cat became a character, a soft, living presence amidst the mechanical hardness of the industrial world. They were curated, photographed, and carefully fed. The cat had not just survived the darkness of the previous centuries. It had fundamentally reshaped itself to fit into the modern human heart. As the 20th century dawned, the world began to fracture under the weight of global conflicts. Yet the cat remained a constant, silent presence in the midst of the chaos. During the horrors of the First World War, cats slipped into the muddy trenches, not as soldiers, but as mascots of normalcy. For young men far from their homes, huddled in the damp earth while artillery thundered overhead, the purring of a cat was a fragile, desperate reminder of the world they had left behind. They hunted the rats that infested the trenches, yes, but more importantly, they offered a sliver of softness in a landscape of metal and wire. This role continued through the Second World War, where cats navigated bombed-out cities and cramped bunkers, becoming tiny islands of peace in a sea of destruction. But while the world was at war, a revolution was brewing in a quiet basement in Michigan. In 1947, Ed Lowe handed a bag of absorbent clay, Fuller's Earth, to a neighbor, accidentally creating the invention that would change everything: kitty litter. Before this, the indoor cat was a difficult, messy proposition, often limited by the need for outdoor access. The invention of commercial litter smashed that barrier, turning the cat into a fully integrated, strictly indoor companion. As suburban landscapes sprawled, the cat adapted to the cul-de-sac and the apartment building. Veterinary medicine began to treat the cat not as a replaceable tool, but as a complex being with specific needs, unlocking longer lifespans and better health. We saw the rise of vaccines, the professionalization of feline care, and the beginning of widespread spaying and neutering to manage the population. The cat had finally achieved total domestic stability. They no longer had to earn their keep as pest controllers in the dark. They were now members of the family, lounging on sofas, watching the world through picture windows, and claiming their place in the heart of the modern human home. Today, the journey that began in the dusty grain pits of the Neolithic era has culminated in a digital conquest unlike anything in history. We live in an age of constant connectivity, high-speed data, and artificial light. Our brains are overwhelmed by information, endless emails, and the relentless noise of the digital landscape. And yet, in the heart of this frantic, hyper-connected existence, we have found our quiet harbor, the screen. We open our devices, and there, in a cascade of infinite loops, we find the cat. A cat blinking in slow motion, a cat failing a jump, a cat merely existing in the warm glow of a sunbeam. Why do we reach for them? Why do hundreds of millions of people stop their day to watch a creature that does nothing more than sit in a box? Psychologists tell us that the sight of a cat triggers our most ancient, primal, nurturing responses. Their round faces and wide eyes mimic the proportions of human infants, activating our protective instincts and flooding our brains with the chemicals of calm. In a world full of high-stakes conflict and complicated narratives, the cat is low-stakes perfection. They are emotional breathing room, A portable, digital pocket of safety that requires nothing from us but our attention. From the early days of grainy image boards to the global algorithm of social media, cats have become the unofficial mascots of our digital culture. They are our mirrors, expressing our own frustrations through the meme, and our anchors, keeping us grounded when the world feels too fast. They have evolved from silent grain guardians to sacred temple dwellers, from misunderstood outcasts to cherished family members, and finally to the influencers of our digital age. 12,000 years after they first stepped out of the shadows, they are still watching us. And we are still, quite helplessly, watching them back. The journey is complete, and yet, as every cat owner knows, the story never really ends. It just pauses, between naps, in the quiet light of another day.